Education and Care, Coronavirus Response and Other Measures Bill 2021. This bill is really a tidy-up of the legislation rushed through Parliament last year when we were first trying to grapple with the coronavirus pandemic. It's not surprising when you rush things through that there is a few errors. That's what obviously happens if you have to rush legislation through, but it was appropriate in the circumstances. Obviously, we had to do this because we need to support families. However, I will return to that in a minute about how the Morrison government didn't quite achieve its objective of supporting families. Nevertheless, it's important that errors which occurred through the rushing of the legislation are corrected, and this bill before the chamber clarifies and states the circumstances where an emergency or disaster can be declared by the Secretary and business continuity payments can be made. This will provide certainty that the actions taken last year were legal and will make business continuity payments and ongoing policy response available to the government. It also reduces the red tape burden on services during disaster events by removing the legal requirement to send weekly reports to the department. It will extend the tax return deadlines from the 2018-19 financial year to March this year to provide a bit more time for people who have not lodged their returns during the pandemic. It removes the 2-year cut-off point for people to be able to lodge their tax return and be eligible for the childcare subsidy. It ensures that emergency disaster events do not count towards the 14-week period of non-attendance after which a child's enrolment is cancelled. There are a few other minor tweaks in the bill that are necessary as well. Now, Labor will support these changes. We'll do anything, obviously, to help families access services. This bill is necessary to effect those necessary changes, and I will be supporting this bill, as will my colleagues. Unfortunately, the bill before the chamber does not correct all of the Morrison government's mistakes when it comes to their support for families during the coronavirus pandemic. What has emerged, which has not been addressed by this bill, is that during the recent snap COVID lockdowns in Adelaide, the lockdowns in Perth and in Brisbane, families were instructed to stay home where childcare centres actually remained open as an essential service for essential workers. And remember, those essential workers could be people that were cleaning, could be ambulance operators, all sorts of people can be essential workers. So what that meant was families staying at home were still being charged the gap fees by childcare centres, as the centres were legally required to levy the fees. So the doors to the centre were open, but the kids couldn't actually leave their own homes to get through those open doors. So the minister has the ability to give centres an exemption from charging gap fees. The minister did provide an exemption during the second Victorian lockdown in 2020, but strangely hasn't provided the exemption for the most recent lockdowns in Perth, in Adelaide and Brisbane. I don't have any families in my electorate that have so much money that they want to pay for a service that they didn't receive. The Shadow Minister has moved an amendment to this bill, a sensible amendment that will take the exemption out of the minister's rules and put it into the Act. This would mean an exemption would be triggered as soon as state or territory governments declared a lockdown. And let's hope that doesn't happen again, but I think that will be the new COVID reality that we live in. So this sensible proposal put forward by the Shadow Minister means that families would not be slugged with fees for care that they are not receiving. It is a very sensible amendment, Deputy Speaker, and ensures parents are not forced to pay for care that they're not able to receive because the state government has actually told them to stay home. Told to stay home for sensible public health reasons. The government should fix this now. A sensible government would support this amendment. And I should stress that there are no political points to be made in this supporting this. This wasn't the only childcare bungle made by the Morrison government during the pandemic. As I said earlier, families were not supported as they should have been. Many families did like the free childcare announcement, lots of press releases, presses announced by the Morrison government, but the delivery didn't quite live up to the hype. So that happens so often with the Morrison government. Many families were locked out of the free childcare and many services were driven to the brink of collapse. Early learning centres had their funding slashed. Many were forced to cut opening hours, to cut staff. Remember, staff in these centres are not well remunerated at all. Lots of evidence that they can barely afford to get into the housing market because they're barely above wages, and they're charged with our most precious commodity, our children, looking after our children. So some centres had to cut places to try and balance their books just to keep their heads above some very troubled waters. Family daycare educators, they are wonderful people. They're the people that we trust to care for our children. They were forced to work for half the pay because they couldn't access JobKeeper. This was a disgrace. We know that a quarter of early learning services were losing money every day. The reaction of the Morrison government, remember, the Prime Minister himself designed this system back when he was a minister. The reaction of the Morrison government, true to form, was to blame the providers. They even encouraged families to dob in centres through a specially set up phone hotline. They really are dobbers united, aren't they, over there? Remember RoboDep? But when we get bosses, we've seen reports now, we've seen bosses rorting the JobKeeper thing, but they don't go say dob in a boss, set up a hotline, no. But they are dobbers united when it comes to normal everyday Australians. So after it all went wrong and couldn't be salvaged, I'm sorry, I missed that interjection from the minister at the table. Oh, okay. I'll take that interjection. So after it all went wrong and couldn't be salvaged, the Morrison government's response was to snap back to the old expensive Morrison-designed childcare subsidy scheme, the one that he designed when he was the minister. So we already have one of the most expensive childcare schemes in the world. What does that mean? Well, on average, childcare costs between 30% and 40% of the average household income in Australia, which seems like a lot when you compare to the OECD, where the average is just 11%. This is because we have a system that has seen children as a burden rather than something to be invested in. We know that childcare fees are soaring. They've increased 35.9% since 2013, so that's on this government's watch, on the Coalition's watch. We know that childcare costs are locking Australian parents out of the workforce. That's bad for families and it's bad for the economy. Why is it bad for the economy? Because there's simple productivity gains that come from giving women a room of their own, putting them back in the workforce, tapping into those skills and expertise that our schools and TAFEs and universities have created. So we have almost 300,000 Australians not participating in the labour force due to the fact they're caring for children. And most of them, I would suggest, are women. The number of parents who say they are not working mainly due to the cost of childcare has skyrocketed by 23%. We know it's too expensive and we know it needs to be fixed, but the Morrison government sadly has no plan to fix it. Maybe if the Coalition government listened to women a little bit more, they might have a better understanding of how families. Maybe if you had 10,000 women out the front of Parliament House, you might make the effort to go out and listen to them. Maybe they've got something to say. I don't know. Who knows? Certainly seemed to be some pretty passionate people out the front of Parliament House on Monday when I went out there. So maybe if they listened to women a bit more and found how families are being impacted by childcare that is unaffordable. We know that paying for that fourth or the fifth day can be a cruel burden on families. Labor has a plan to make childcare more affordable for families so more parents can get back into the workforce. Our cheaper childcare for working families plan will scrap the $10,560 childcare subsidy cap, which currently sees women paying to work for that extra day of work. It will lift the maximum childcare subsidy rate to 90% and will increase the childcare subsidy rates and taper them for every family earning less than $530,000. It's important that the cost of childcare goes down, but it is even more important that the cost of childcare stays down. Labor will task the ACCC with designing a price regulation mechanism to shed light on costs and fees and drive them down for good. We'll also ask the Productivity Commission to conduct a comprehensive review of the sector with the aim of implementing a universal 90% subsidy for all families. That's a good plan. It's a sensible plan. It will reward working families and allow more second income earners, who are usually women, to work more and contribute to our economic recovery. We have a plan to fix Morrison's broken childcare system. The Coalition government is just patching up a broken system. I support this bill and the amendment moved by the Shadow Minister, the member for Kingston.